Welcome to Textile Talks. I am Jamie Swartz at the International Quilt Museum, located at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. The International Quilt Museum proudly stewards and exhibits the world's largest collection of quilts and related textiles that span 5 centuries and over 65 countries. In fact, that is our mission, to build a global collection and an audience that celebrates the cultural and artistic significance of quilts. If this is your passion too, and you aren't already a member, we'd love to have you join us. Before we begin, I would like to thank the organizations that partner with the International Quilt Museum to bring textile talks each week: the Quilt Alliance, SAQA, and the Surface Design Association. We are honored to bring you free and inspiring programming with the help of our sponsors. We couldn't do it without their generosity and the generosity of viewers like you. There's just a couple of housekeeping reminders before I introduce our program. We have the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom. That's for questions and answers. And the chat box for greeting others and survey for commentary on the ways we could improve. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. Live captions make Textile Talks accessible to a wider audience. If you prefer not to view captions, you should be able to turn them off. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you again to our sponsors and to all of you who support this program. And I'd love to introduce our two artists. They go under one name, DARNstudio. I've got Ron Norsworthy and David Anthone. Hi, Ron. Hey, David.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for coming on today to talk about your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm honored to have you on. I'm a huge fan of yours. Outside of having 2 quilts in the collection here, I think I was a huge fan of your work before I came to the collection.
Thank you.
So it's such an honor to talk to you today.
It is. We're always
Thanks.
excited to talk about our interesting collaboration and the work that we're making. So can't wait to start.
Yeah, I'll share my screen here. I got your presentation up so everybody can see that. Right?
All right.
All right, let's go.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for creating this platform, and a special shout out to Surface Design Association and Studio Art Quilt Association, and of course, International Quilt Museum for sharing our work with your audiences. It's been an honor to be included in your programming and respective publications over the years. So a little bit about us. We are a collaboration of 2 art and life partners who investigate ideas by connecting histories and objects. We're both raised in the Midwest, David in Nebraska and me in Indiana, Iowa, and Illinois. Our practice was born out of using art as a way to understand each other's disparate backgrounds. And kind of art became our language, right? How we communicated with each other and shared with one another. It's a very, very big deal for us to be able to share a little bit about our practice with all of you. We're fluid in mediums. We work in photography, collage, sculpture, and work from the micros, such as the design of a matchbook cover, to the macro and investigating public monuments. Working clockwise from the upper left image in this first slide, here are some examples of the work that we do outside of quilting. Top left is Trippin', which is a microfilm in 2 parts that imagines David and I on a cross-country road trip during the Black Lives Matter era. The next image is Ago, which is a proposed monument in the form of a brick kiln that honors enslaved laborers who worked on the campus of Roanoke College. The next image down from that is Goat the Art Game, which is a social sculpture in the form of an art auction board game. And then finally, we have Confederate Monument Remix, which is a proposal to transform the Stonewall Jackson statue in Richmond, Virginia. The common thread in all of our work is an exploration of our lived histories and how our individual unique expressions intersect to create a third, new, different entity and show a new way of looking at things, redefining or remeaning, as we like to say.
And DARNstudio, by the way, is what we go by, and it's an acronym of our name, David Anthone and Ron Norsworthy, in addition to meaning stitching.
Yeah.
So let's get started. And I want to share with you just this idea of where inspiration can come from, and that it can come from the most unexpected places. So go with me on a journey of a memory I have growing up in a small town in Nebraska, a large Catholic family living in a big old frame house. And across the street from our old house lived a curious man. And for us neighborhood kids, we loved going over to his house because we could, he had a lot of candy. And so
It's the candy.
yeah, walking in the door, there was this closed, dusty keyboard of his upright piano and boxes of candy. Jolly Ranchers, bubble gum, Zots, Red Hots, candy bars. In fact, Butch's house was full of boxes and boxes of all kinds of things, not just candy. Um, he collected things, he stored things, there was debris, all kinds of stuff. We didn't know the term then, but he was called a hoarder. In fact, he was an obsessive collector, and his
Mm.
house was chock-a-block full of organized and unorganized collections, clutter, and debris. I was fascinated by this alternative way of living, and one day I ventured over to Butch's house on my own, and I opened the screen door and walked right past Butch where he was passed out or sleeping in his armchair in front of the television. I followed the single cleared path through the living room and into the dining room and up a skinnier path up to the second floor. And there I opened a bedroom door, and to my surprise, the room was clean of clutter, except it was a little dusty. Was filtering through the sheer curtains onto a full-size bed. And on that bed was a bedspread, completely covered in pinned souvenir matchbooks. It was awesome and surreal to me. Given that I wasn't supposed to sneak through Butch's house, I never told anyone about the matchbook quilt, nor did I ever go visit it again. In time, I grew up and I moved away, and in time, Butch died, and the contents of his home, a lifetime of memories, collections, and boxes of open and unopened candy, and the souvenir matchbook quilt, were all thrown away, but the powerful memory of this souvenir quilt had planted a seed within me. Decades later, something would rekindle this memory, and I shared the story with Ron. And we began out of our curiosity and artistic challenge. We decided to recreate a matchbook quilt. And while our main goal at the time was form, the project had yet to find its meaning.
Around the same time of our investigation of matchbook quilts, a second seed was planted that would reveal a purpose to our new project. This second seed was our recent move to Roxbury, Connecticut, historically noted for artists and writers, not the least of whom being James Baldwin. During extended stays with fellow writers Bill and Rose Styron at their home in Roxbury, Baldwin wrote portions of the book Another Country. We took this as a sign to contemplate the multiple meanings of the term another country and how it might shape this new project we were cooking up. Some of the things that we were thinking about was it could be an homage to James Baldwin and his legacy of fearless truth-telling, questioning whose country? Is this our country or is it another country? From what we were taught from our parents' dreams? What are our own aspirations for our still pretty new mixed race and pre-marriage equality queer couple that lacked legal standing? Remember, this was 2016, 2017 when we were cooking up this crazy project. Um, and we also wanted to unapologetically proclaim that whatever we would be making would be unconventional, boundary crossing, and hopefully challenge categorization. It would be an other option.
Wow. I had no idea that a childhood memory
Hmm.
sparked
It could
the
spark all of this, right?
I'm like blown away. Wow, this is really cool. Yeah, much respect to your work because it's so layered, and this adds another dimension to it. I think that's really cool.
I think it makes it really personal, you know, and I also think that our for us, it became much more layered, as you're going to find out as we share more about these quilts. But I don't know that we've ever been able to tell the story of how the quilts came about, really. So we really appreciate this opportunity because this is something that we haven't really shared out much or have the
Oh,
opportunity to share out much.
oh,
Um, so the it's gonna get more layered, guys. So I hope you're ready.
I love it. Keep going. Let's keep
There's
going.
there's more. All right, next slide, please. So why matchbooks? Why quilts? And why matchbook quilts? For us, David and I think and process completely differently. I think collaborations are pretty tough, and for us, especially in the beginning, it was we had to find a framework that we could kind of share our ideas and honor both of the kind of places where we were coming from conceptually. But one thing that we align on is a fierce curiosity and creativity that cause us to nerd out and dive headlong into anything that's caught our attention. In our practice, we always start with the idea, which then shapes what materials we use and the form our art will take. These conversations get very lively, especially in the beginning. So at the time, while discussing why the country felt different to us, like another country, like another America, we each had a lot to say. Of course, questions begat more questions, but we don't mind questions because they usually lead to an interesting place for us. But we don't mind and we thought about what shaped our individual ideas about America. We thought about this idea of nostalgia, a longing for the good old days, quote unquote. And were the good old days good for everybody? And I think that's a question that we're all kind of contemplating now. Um, for many of us of a certain age, we have fond memories around traveling and the matchbooks that we might have collected to remind us of those places. That favorite restaurant, the roadside motel you stayed at on your summer vacation, or the resort you stayed at for your aunt's wedding. Matchbooks have always functioned as pocket souvenirs that trigger memory. And usually they're pleasant memories. This idea about cherishing fond memories got us thinking, what if we could use this concept of the souvenir to differently activate our consciousness? If a souvenir matchbook had the power to conjure positive thoughts, then could it function as a vehicle towards more complex and nuanced understanding? Could it also be a kind of truth mirror that reflected back a more comprehensive picture, the good, the bad, and the ugly, or very ugly?
Yeah, so put another way, could this little piece of America ephemera, the matchbook, the humble souvenir, help us remember what is collectively too painful and which we may seek to even block or erase to unremember?
So for us, souvenir matchbooks kinda or definitely felt like the perfect material for us to use. Next slide, please.
But this concept of nostalgia had more to give here. How else do we maintain connections to our past? Through photographs, through recipes and stories, and other inheritances and heirlooms such as quilts. Our two seeds, Butch's Ersatz Matchbook Bedspread and the Baldwin title, had combined to germinate into what would become the first project of our new art collaboration of DARNstudio. But to make a quilt out of matchbooks felt like a nutty oxymoron, antithetical to anything that quilts had ever meant to either of us. How would we even make them? And so we had the question, and so we had many questions, and we loved the challenge. Begin in 2016, Another Country, a Quilt Cycle is an ongoing series of quilts made out of custom designed matchbooks that memorialize Black men and women killed by law enforcement. They are quilts, and they are also ciphers, data maps, memorials, and monuments. Our project in collaboration was conceived during a period of major transition, both in our new relationship, Ron and I, and against a larger backdrop of national and social political disruption. The magic spark came when the memory of the Hoarder's Matchbook quilt and the pattern narratives of the Underground Railroad quilts began to come together. The conceptual thesis for our project would be this question: if Underground Railroad quilts existed today, what would they say?
So let's dive into some of the individual quilts from the series. As the Crow Flies, this first quilt depicts blackbirds flying against a blue sky with white fluffy clouds. The pattern references 80s video shooting games as well as the Jim Crow era. In this installation image, the quilt is shown draped over a pedestal. We really had a breakthrough. This was our first exhibition of the quilts all together. I think we had maybe 9 quilts, 8 quilts in this exhibition, and it was shown in an old mill that had been repurposed as an art gallery. So there was a wonderful kind of synergy of place and object that we were able to kind of magically capture with this exhibition. And the name of the exhibition that this quilt was in was called Heirlooms.
Where was the exhibition at exactly, like location-wise?
It was in Wassaic, New York at the Wassaic Project.
Cool. Yeah, what kind of mill was it? I'm just kind of curious.
It's like a 7 or 8 story granary, a
Oh,
grain
okay.
mill, and
Wow.
every floor now is dedicated to art. It's kind of wild and
Yeah, it's
amazing.
the whole thing is like an art museum.
Wow.
So with a rotating cast of really wonderful programming of group shows and solo exhibitions. It's a great, great, great place. And we were just at the beginning of this project, which is an ongoing series. So we're doing it until we don't.
Love
But it was our first solo show of more than a couple of quilts.
Cool. It's just thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, the next slide gives you a sense of the scale of some of our larger quilts. Um, this one is called Snake in the Garden, which depicts white snakes against a green field with red flowers. Kind of looks like a French parterre if you were looking over the top of it. Um, and people have also said it resembles an African basket, and we love all of the references that our patterns and quilts can conjure. Um, this pattern for us and another country project speaks to the historic use of the Bible and religion to justify oppression. You know, the presence of the garden and the serpent are visual references and cues here. While we were fabricating this quilt and continuing our research, we became aware of an exhibition at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., featuring what has come to be known as the Slave Bible. The Slave Bible is a redacted version of the King James Bible, with most of the Old Testament and parts of the New Testament removed to promote obedience and prevent rebellion among enslaved people in the British West Indies. Created in England in the early 19th century, the Slave Bible omitted passages about freedom and equality, leaving verses that instructed slaves to obey their masters. Only a few copies of the Slave Bible exist, with one at Fisk University and 2 in the United Kingdom. This is just one example of our research and how we support our patterns and our quilts with a considerable amount of scholarly pursuit and research, and also just to kind of satiate our curiosity about what we're working on. But it starts to inform what we're making and how we're making it. Um, the next slide. Oh, what I want to say about the previous slide, if we could go back, um, something really interesting is that people that are young, say Gen Z and Gen Alpha, have no idea what matchbooks are. They're fascinated by them as a material.
Yeah,
So
they'll ask us what they are, and we tell them, and they look at us with a crooked face, like, "Well, what's that
what
do?
what is
What
a
do they do?"
matchbook? Yeah, it's this archaic, charming bit of Americana. It's kind of amazing. Um, Not to us because it's so familiar to us, but generationally, it is this old-fashioned thing that no one's ever seen. So this little guy was super fascinated by what he was looking at, and this is one of our favorite images. in our archive. So
That's
the next slide. So this piece is called Robes BW, or Robes Black and White. It depicts 9 black robes against a field of inverted white robes. It really kind of plays with your eyes about foreground and background. Created in 2018, this pattern was inspired by a quote from activist and author Anthony Ray Hinton, who was wrongfully convicted of a crime that he did not commit in 1985 and released in 2015. Hinton shared in his memoir, The Sun Does Shine, quote, "The good old boys had traded in their white robes for black robes, but it was still a lynching."
Next slide. The amplify pattern uses a repeating volume symbol turned in various directions to talk about the power of social media platforms to bring attention to systemic patterns of policing that criminalize Blackness. And in this quilt, the primary matchbooks are people represented are Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Philandro Castile, Jordan Davis, Eric Gardner, Akai Gurley, and Alton Sterling, whose deaths were captured on video in the moment and or magnified by social media. Next slide. Here's a detail of one of the matches, and it shows you how we design them and put them together and use them in the quilt. It represents Eric Gardner, who was killed in front of Bay Beauty Supply store in Staten Island on July 17, 2014. The front shows the place where the individual was killed, Bay Beauty Supply, and on the back there's an alphanumeric code consisting of the victim's first and last initial and the date they were killed. Designed and fabricated specifically for this project in another country, we use both the fronts and the backs in the matchbooks and the quilt designs.
We often like to say that our quilt project has kind of it's got layered narratives in it. So the quilt books are also art. The matchbooks are also artworks themselves. And then the patterns is another artwork, and then the quilts themselves are the object that we made. So it's kind of got they're layered, and in those layers come different kinds of meanings and hopefully understandings and takeaways.
Yeah, one thing that I think is really beautiful about your work is the symbolism is layered, although the textile is not. So to me, it's still a quilt.
Yeah.
It's still got many, many layers, more layers than a quilt would ever have.
Yeah, and what we're beginning to unpack is that idea of usually a souvenir matchbook is a place you took away from a happy memory. People ask us, where did you get so many matchbooks? The point is, people are not making matchbooks to commemorate the death of brown and black people by law enforcement. So this is always an interesting topic that people want to talk about.
Yeah, and that's why we feel very strongly that these works we were compelled to make them because we were just barraged in the media with this period of killings. I don't think it was just during that period. I just think our attention was brought to it during this time. And we felt an overwhelm when we were processing all of this on the news. It almost became sort of like trauma porn. We couldn't hold all of it. And in different ways, the quilts and the process of making them, because they take so long to make, but we'll get to that later. I think that for us, for me specifically, it was a way to grieve. It was a way to process what was happening in our country and to make a record, to document. And the matchbooks altogether represent sort of a map of all the places where these police killings have happened across the country, in towns, in the country, all over the place. It doesn't matter where they happen, it's ubiquitous. So that's what we sort of learned, and it became, I don't know that it started off as an ongoing project, but it became an ongoing series when we committed ourselves to continuing to bring awareness and to document, um, at least as many of these unfortunate killings as we could. So this pattern is called New Shoe Fly. It was the first quilt that we started in the series. As many of you may recognize, the quilt is based on shoe fly, which is one of the Underground Railroad quilt patterns. And it has been said to represent protection. But we knew that in the context of our project, shoe fly needed perhaps an intervention, but we needed time to marinate on what that could be. Thus, a few years would pass before we assembled the quilt panel. So even though we started on this one first, I don't think we actually put it together until we had done maybe 3 or 4 other large scale quilts. Our new shoe fly pattern adds yellow and black striped rows between the traditional shoe fly blocks. It's a visual nod towards caution tape and maybe a prompt for the viewer to dig deeper into notions of protection, control, peacekeeping when thinking about law enforcement, perhaps especially in neighborhoods of color.
Okay, Ron, I've got a question for you. I hate to interrupt.
No, please
And
do.
I just want to address the elephant in the room, sort of. I think you're probably aware of many conversations and discourse that is around the Underground Railroad quilt book. I just want our viewers to be, oh, maybe I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we acknowledge this ongoing discourse about alleged. And so,
Right. And what you're referencing is oral histories, and it's not
Yeah.
recorded anywhere that these patterns actually mean these things and that they actually helped enslave people who ran from the plantations and find their way to the north
right.
through these patterns.
So I think that our approach was not to be ignorant of all of the positions that have been taken around these quilts. I think it's an ongoing discussion. I think for us, it is the lore. It is the folk characteristic of oral storytelling that holds the power for our project. And so, whereas those quilts may or may not actually exist, our quilts do. And that is it for us there. It's not so much like, do they exist? We don't care. That's not really important to us and our project.
And some people say they do bring this up and they say, well, the oral history of the Underground Railroad quilts is not true. Trying to negate that, but neither is the story of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree or telling a lie, not telling a lie. And so what we're kind of getting into is mythical storytelling, or what is the message of this story, that why is it important that we tell these stories?
And who tells the story? Who decides on history and the hierarchies of history, recording of history? So why are written histories more important than oral histories? For example, why do they take a scholarly precedent over oral histories? All of these questions are very fascinating to us. And so I think that it creates a rich foundation for being able to create something that is perhaps unconventional to many of the people tuning into this talk.
So just a little bit more about this quilt. And we put it in a box, the 16 panels in a box, because we were a little uneasy about what is the message we're trying to give with shoe fly. It's not so much about protection. And then we were listening to the news. We heard Michael Brown, who was killed in Missouri, Ferguson. His mom saying, all I remember is the yellow and black caution tape. Now, when we hear something like that, something happens in our minds and we instantly put that with this quilt. And then it became an updated version of something archaic from the 19th century. And it's still the power of shoe fly, but reinterpreted. So symbols hold a lot of power.
Thank you for that really thoughtful explanation. Appreciate it.
Probably more than what you wanted to hear, but I do think
No,
I'm glad you
I,
brought it up. Yeah,
I
I'm
think
glad.
our audience would be very interested. We'll probably be asking that question at the end of it. So I had to do my duty here.
Good, good.
Cool. We can go to the next one.
So this piece is called Battle Flags. It was an edition made for a group exhibition that called participating artists to reinterpret the flag form. Some of you may recognize a little bit the American flag. The pattern riffs on the stars and the bars of the American flag with playful use of color and flipping the pattern upside down. These mini quilts can be hung however you choose, with grommets on all four corners and the matches sewn in all directions. There is no quote unquote right way to orient them.
Next slide. And this one is called Courthouse Steps. Yeah, it's based on a historic pattern that we've updated and reinterpreted through matchbooks. It prompts us to examine the judiciary's role in reinforcing systems that negatively impact marginalized communities. And the reason why we really wanted to show this is to show you the back of it. This is what the back of the stitching looks like, the back of the quilt. And in this case, we've changed the thread, which corresponds with the pattern on the front, to reinforce and highlight that image on the front side.
And this is an installation view of Courthouse Steps, Study 1, in its new home in the metropolitan DC area. I'm also proud to share that I designed this space as well. So I was the interior architect of this project. And I didn't design the space with the idea that one of our quilts would eventually hang over the fireplace. There wasn't actually a fireplace. We added that. I love the way that the work looks. It looks like it kind of belongs there. The concentric squares of the coffered ceiling and their dimension mimics the artwork and the way the pattern drives the eye straight to its center. I'm also loving the modern irony of an artwork made of matches hanging over a fireplace. I think that's kind of cool. I'm usually super self-critical, but I don't have any notes on this one. I think this work has found its perfect home, and that always makes us so happy when we do commissions.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh my God.
And here we have a quilt called Don't Cross the Line. It's inspired by the improvisational quilt designs of G's Bend Collective, which many of you know. This medium-sized quilt pattern evokes a city block, a map of a city block, and the system of redlining used to segregate neighborhoods. And although redlining is now illegal, it still negatively impacts predominantly black and brown communities. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about this, but we've often been asked about our process and specifically how we wrangle nearly 3,000 matchbooks into each quilt and make a cohesive whole. At nearly 8 feet by 8 feet, each quilt is initially a daunting task requiring us to come up with bespoke fabrication processes. Using two quilts from the collection of the International Quilt Museum, we'd like to share with you and briefly walk through our conceptual process. We'll start with Cakewalk. For this, we started with research and taking a critical look at origin stories. So here we go, diving into the history of something. Our quilts often have idiomatic titles, so we typically do a deep dive into the histories of those terms. In this case, the term cakewalk.
So a little bit about Cakewalk. And again, showing the first thing, we kind of always start with sort of sketching the pattern and um, very, very simple iconography. Like we want the simplest thing that you can identify. So you might see if you pick the pattern apart, you might see this sort of three-tiered wedding cake shape that we've spun around um, uh, a set of concentric squares. So I'm going to talk about how this pattern reinforces what I'm about to say or is a visual representation of this description. So this is from one of the one of the information cards that hung beside the quilt, one of the places it was exhibited, before it made its way to the International Quilt Museum. So the pattern takes its name from the exaggerated performative dancing that enslaved Black Americans would do in competitions when they would caricature the dancing, gestures, and social customs of their owners and the planter class. Plantation owners served as judges for these elaborately performed contests and would award a cake to the winner, unaware that they may just have been mocked in the process. Perhaps ironically, these contests evolved into a dance that became popular among wider white audiences during Reconstruction when it was often performed in blackface during minstrel shows. Comprised of a repeating motif of colorful layered cakes rotating around an axis of concentric squares, the pattern and the eponymously titled work are a graphic nod to how the original dance was done, with couples standing in a square formation, men on the inside, women on the outside, and dancing around the perimeter of a room. Men were awarded particular favor for how precisely they turned the corners. Contemporary usage of the term, particularly, quote, "it was a cakewalk," and, quote, "takes the cake," has precluded, if not completely erased, its original meaning, and most crucially, neutered its initial conception as a clever retaliation against racial inequity from popular awareness. Cakewalk seems to firmly recenter the layered etymology of an oft-used idiom and spark conversations around meanings and contexts through the lenses of cultural appropriation and social power dynamics.
Wow.
All right, Jamie. Yep, there we go. And Barcode, the second quilt in the International Quilt Museum's collection, was acquired in 2023. There's always a bit of a history lesson in our quilts, and this one is no different. So the term barcode entered our cultural lexicon in the 1970s when a pack of Wrigley's Spearmint Gum was scanned at a Marsh supermarket in Troy, Michigan. This efficient and effective method of representing and tracking data in a visual, machine-readable form, data represented by varying the widths, spacings, and sizes of parallel lines, not only proved successful in the streamlining of manufacturing processes, but also for the rapidly expanding prison industrial system through the use of wristband tracking. And going back further in time, only a year following Reconstruction, we see the development of the American Bar Association and its Code of Ethics, Bar Code, with the preamble, a lawyer's responsibility is as a representative of their client. It would take another 65 years before the bar accepted integration of African Americans in 1943. As of 2025, Black lawyers disproportionately represent only 5% of the legal profession. The individuals commemorated in the barcode quilt are George Floyd, Laquan McDonald, Daniel Prude, DJ Henry, among others. And so this next slide, this one here shows the pattern that we put up of barcode divided into its 16 panels or sections with open channels separating each of the sections. After stitching these 16 panels together onto the backing, the channels are filled in to hide the seams and the quilt is completed.
And I also want to say that this is typically, if you go back, this is typically how we think about our patterns. Sometimes it's a repeating motif, like new shoe fly, or like, for instance, snake in the garden. Um, and then other ones are more sort of a maxi pattern where you have to put all of the panels together to make the image. So it's always wonderful to see, but we break it down into, this is kind of part of this bespoke process that David spoke about earlier in our talk, where we, in order to work on it individually, we broke it into these 20 by 20 foot sections that we could work on by ourselves. Anyone that's making a large scale quilt, how you fabricate a quilt of that scale, especially working with, for us, in unconventional materials, we really had to devise a system that would allow us to assemble these panels into a larger quilt. But we are really borrowing from some of the traditional quilting fabrication techniques to make this. In the next slide, you'll see this was while we were fellows at the McDowell Artist Residency, and had this gorgeous studio that we had all to ourselves. And this is where Barcode was not born, but where it started to take form.
So if you look closely in the first image there, that's me stitching one of the panels, and
Sorry.
each matchbook goes down one by one into making 16 panels, square panels that are then put together. If you see on the wall, the panels are pinned up before the channels are put in. And then when they go on the backing, the channels help connect those 16 panels onto the backing, much like a quilting bee. And then the quilt is finished. But we had to think about what is the strength of this stitch? What is the strength of the panel to the backing? How much will the ultimate quilt weigh? How will that weight be hung on a wall? How will it be stored? How will it be rolled and shipped? Everything had to be
Yeah.
thought out.
And like the matchbooks have a weight to them. So over time, you can get a sag. So we also had to think about a material that was substantial enough to support for instance, on these large scale quilts, almost 3,000 matchbooks, which is what it takes to comprise these things. And I saw a question earlier. Someone asked where the matchbooks come from. And just to say again that nobody would have these matchbooks laying around, uh, but certainly not in the colors or quantities that we needed. But I love that question because I think for us, our goal in designing these matchbooks, which again we think of as miniature artworks in and of themselves, they are we wanted them to look as if they already existed in the world. And I think we succeeded at that. It's almost like banal design, or like design slop, where you want something that's just perfunctory and shares the information, but doesn't distract too much from the overall effect that we were going for in the creation of the quilts.
Yeah, they look very much like advertising matchbooks. And the strange thing is we have another partnership with this matchbook company who doesn't quite understand what we're doing. They're used to making matchbooks to give to companies to give away as souvenirs or, advertising.
Right.
And so we need them. And what's interesting about the history of matchbooks, which were once very common, there's only a few matchbook companies left in America.
Yeah, that was going to be my burning question at the end. How many matchbook companies make these anymore?
Yeah, it's not, I mean, there are some that literally there seems like there's a bit of a monopoly that has happened. So bigger companies buying smaller companies. I think that's happening across industries in this world that we're living in. But the even when we tried smaller companies, they would off-source the work to the bigger companies. So we ended up we were like, let's just go straight to the source and eliminate the middleman. We were dealing with like a broker and all this stuff in the very beginning. And interestingly, a kind of funny aside is not knowing what we were doing. And we weren't necessarily eager to share what we were doing either. We they would suggest like, well, we have a matchbook for Laquan McDonald that's actually in this quilt. His matches are orange, and the broker that we were working with was like, well, Chicago, Laquan McDonald was killed in Chicago, and we have the seal of Chicago on the matchbook, and he said, well, Chicago's colors aren't. Don't you want red, white, and blue? Don't you want blue and like this special blue and this red and for the stars? And we're like, well, no, it's not necessarily about that. And we kind of have some autonomy. But honestly, I think that the perception is that we're graphic designers that are creating matchbooks for these entities.
And they're trying to be helpful to matchbook.
They're trying to be helpful, like they're trying to help us save money. But we're like, we need this color. It has to be these two colors. You know, like I feel like it's wonderful. And now I believe that
They get
they
us.
kind of know and they've seen the work has been out there in the world now for a little bit. So I think they know and they're even more enthusiastic, which is kind
Uh,
of cool. Yeah.
okay, I've got one more question for you. You talked a little bit about the backing material. I have to assume there's some kind of symbolism, but maybe there isn't in the gray felt.
Oh, it's Joseph Boys.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Joseph Beuys. It's around his
Oh, okay.
the Fluxus movement
Yeah,
and their use of unconventional processes and materials. And I believe that some of this work that we do is a continuation of that movement of breaking the tradition of painting and sculpture. That's when conceptual art is born. That's when you see a lot of experimental materials through Joseph Beuys and Yoko Ono and a bunch of other cutting edge artists that are still today cutting edge.
yeah.
So that's, I think, what has happened here. Felt is also an amazing material for cutting and stitching, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, and I think too that like being able, some of our favorite quilts that we can think of are made from sort of this idea of discarded materials or leftover materials that maybe in the hierarchy of fine art are less revered. And so for us to kind of push back on this idea of material hierarchies in the art world and to you know, we liked a remix, so kind of assigning new meaning, a new specialness, making something extraordinary that we consider ordinary or a craft material and elevating it, you know, and elevating it by our measures, not by society's measures, but just doing something different with a material. And for us, the functionality of this recycled felt, which it takes all of these plastic bottles out of the world and makes a fabric out of them, which I think is really, really cool. So we feel like we're doing our bit ecologically as well.
It's interesting to me, like this idea that no one in their wildest dream would think matchbooks would be used in a quilt. No one in their wildest dream would think a pop bottle, a soda bottle would be used to make fabric that would be used in fine art. Same as recycling a building, a customs house into luxury housing and things like that. This reuse is very exciting because there is no limit to what something could actually become.
Right.
Love it. Thank you for explaining that.
And I think we got a
Yeah.
few more.
Oh, we just have one more.
Yeah, so here we have a little teaser. It's a sneak peek as something we're working on now.
And this piece is entitled Space Invaders. Duh, right? But the work pays homage to the vintage Atari game. But as with all of our work, the pattern has multiple meanings. So stay tuned. And that is our talk. And we cannot wait to hear some questions.
Yeah, be happy. We've got a number of questions. I'll go all the way to the back. Um, Somebody asks if your materials affect it present any issues for display in museums, galleries, and homes. I feel like I'm more, but you can answer that one.
Well, no, we'd love to hear your answer.
And my background, my master's degree is in material science, conservation of architectural materials. So
Oh, okay.
I'm very aware when I see buildings, I see how they decay. As Jamie,
Mm,
you probably think about the decay of materials, but I'm very factual. Conservators often try to retard everything. They
yeah,
think to keep it alive forever. Nothing
yeah.
lasts forever. You're just retarding the aging process. Even the
Mhm.
Mona Lisa someday will be touched up, cleaned, repainted, whatever. And so we have a very open idea about that. It does come up about this ephemera of paper and of the match
The
itself.
phosphorus in the matchbooks. So the the matchbooks actually become they're technically safety matches. So back in the day, you could have a match that you just lit on anything. You'd strike it on anything and it would ignite, which led to lots of house fires and all sorts of destruction. So safety matches have this cover on them, and they are safety matches for that matter. You need to strike the phosphorus strike pad in order to make everything work. So for as our quilts age, they become less flammable, less potent. Anybody that has experienced an old set of matches and tried to light a match understands what happens, right? So for us, it's always been an interesting question, and I want to hear what you have to say, Jamie, but we have had interesting questions from conservators, conservators who have literally requested that we remove the matches
Or
from the match
or
or cut them
the
out,
heads off.
cut the heads off, um, and which would require literally unmaking the piece and basically neutering it. So I think, and besides the function of, and for us,
A bridge too
that's a
far.
bridge too
That's a
far.
bridge
That's a
too
bridge too far because also the symbolism of the potential of the idea of tying down a matchbook so that you cannot access the matches. People are like, oh, what's to keep you from, you can't actually get at the matches inside. There's no way that you can get inside without snipping, destroying the artwork.
So there's a symbolism there with the power of a matchbook, the power of fire being neutered by sewing it down.
And
so there's a
for us, that
there's a
felt like a
connection.
for us that felt like a corollary to these people who almost all of them are very young in their 20s and their 30s, whose lives were ended before they could realize their potential. So thinking about racial oppression and potential and the tension created of taking a match and tying it down, restricting that potential was a very important component of these works conceptually for us.
Now to answer, and then Jamie, you
Jamie, you got to tell us.
some of the smaller samplers and the mid-sized quilts are framed behind glass.
Yeah.
Most of the comments have come from conservators, not from collectors or even museums.
Right. So
Mostly conservators. So I'm going to throw it to you, Jamie, to defend the profession.
Oh, yeah, your piece sent me down a rabbit hole I'd never really expected to go down, searching for the conservation of matchbooks. And there's a really small body of publications about this and research about it. And most people, yeah, suggest you either cut the heads off or paint over each head with
or
like,
seal them. Yeah.
yeah, which is obviously something we couldn't do. And
Yeah.
then, you just kind of had to weigh the risks of, so nobody's going to be able to strike the matches against the pad. So I think we're just living with it right now, unless
And
there's new research that comes out. Yeah, your matches, as you correctly talked about, are not going to self-ignite, unlike the ones that were made in the 19th century. And you
exactly.
could pick up like there was huge fires in the factories from these matches.
You and we probably did the same research. There's very little research out there. And I think that where I think that our work presents a different kind of challenge. I wouldn't call it a problem. I think it's a challenge. So as artists come up with new art forms, such as a matchbook quilt made out of our materials, I think it presents opportunity to come up with processes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you are going to sort of help establish how these things are taken care of in the future. If there's any other crazy artists out there that want to make matchbook quilts. But like I think that for ours, it's quite a unique thing that never existed before. So
And I love that. I like this idea of like we all are stardust. We come from that things transform. So I don't know why it's always guys, but guys say to us, have you ever burned one? No, but it might be interesting if we try and then take the ashes and turn them into glaze and put it on a
Oh,
pot, piece of ceramic.
Yeah.
Things transform. So in this big picture of who we are and we're not the center of the universe, we are going to evolve, go back into the earth. And so that's an interesting idea too.
And I think also the matchbooks are varnished, so that is to protect the printing, right? So
yeah.
they're before we even get them, they are made to endure UV and all of that stuff. So kind of working with existing things that are literally made for a purpose that we have repurposed, but they're made to exist in the world as matchbooks. And I think from the design of a matchbook is pretty ingenious when you think about it. And whoever came up with that, I'm really happy that they did because we have a wonderful material to work with.
Yeah, so cool. Um, Lots of questions about the storing of these and also questions we answered about how you make them. Do you have any exhibitions coming up anytime soon that people maybe could catch your work in person?
Let me, there is one at the Bemis auction in Omaha. So
Oh,
if you're in the Omaha area, you can go see a mid-size one. What's happened is, just to speak bluntly, is Ron's solo career has taken off. So we are focusing currently on Ron's career, which is going gangbusters. The quilts are kind of on a pause. We're still
yeah,
doing commissions, but we're not aggressively putting them out there. Right now, we're not, there's nothing traveling in a show, right?
Right. And this is, for us, this is kind of about, and I think this is a frustrating answer for this question, but for us, this is an endurance thing. It's not so much about, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's not so much about producing and showing, which is what artists can get caught up in. But I think that every opportunity that presents itself. So last year we were in a group exhibition at the Mattituck Museum. So as more people find out about us, we were on a couple years ago on the cover of the Kenyon Review, where one of our matchbook quilts was featured. CBS Saturday morning did a story on my evolution as an artist and literally blasted your quilt cakewalk as on all of these screens in the back of the story. So like it's the work is making its way out into culture, and
Yeah.
we are just literally not so much aggressively pursuing opportunities, but hoping that, for instance, talks like these will bring the right opportunities to show this work. And it's it's made of a time, but we see them as being like records that only are going to become more precious and more value as time evolves. So we're looking at this
Yeah.
sort of in a big
And
picture. And
I do think Space Invaders is probably going to emerge soon because
it wants to
Space
be born.
Invaders, the game, which was the first most successful mega hit game, is 50 years old in 2025. And so this quilt was begun through the killing of Sonia Massey, who police entered her home and shot her. And so that's what the invader part is about, space invading my space. And so we think it's going to be it's a very playful design to come to as you see it, but it's a very disturbing, traumatic event that happened and that it represents. And so I think that one probably will be coming out and you might be seeing that around.
Yeah, and I think that where there's a question about storage, and you store it, but I think we store in similar ways. So when we are shipping these quilts to collectors, and when we are or shipping them to a museum for exhibition, or even storing them, we roll them on a 6-inch carpet, 4-inch or 6-inch carpet tube, and with the matches out, and with lots of padding so that they don't crush themselves. And they're stored in like a 9-foot long telescoping box. They have their own sort of boxes, and we store them that way. So again, like the we're not necessarily at capacity, and storage isn't really the issue for us. It's just about making quilts that pique our interest, right? So how do we look at the quilts we've made thus far as being like this amazing conversation between these nutty relatives, right? That have a lot to say. And we want to add to that family in a mindful, intentional way, and not just be responsive. Nothing in this work at all is reactionary. It's all about our own sort of curiosity and wanting the conversations that we have had. Um, and the quilts are proof of those conversations. I think really wonderful, robust, vibrant conversations. And the quilts are the evidence of those conversations and that research that we've had. So yeah, we make them as the ideas come to us, but it's again not a sprint. It's a marathon for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't ever say we do store them around rolled face out on a tube with some polyester batting as well, sandwiched between some layers of tissue. Yeah, we take good care of your pieces here.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
We're so happy for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today. The time went by really quickly, and I really enjoyed all you had to share. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. It was so much fun sharing our story because we didn't share that story. We don't get to share it much about Butch's old matchbook bedspread, but it was a really humble genesis for this project that has blossomed into this big thing that kind of can live and breathe on its own. So thank you, everybody, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, be well.
See you again soon.
All right.